All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome. Thank you for being here with us today. We've got a super exciting topic. As you can see from this cover slide, we are talking endpoint security enhancements with CrowdStrike, Dell, and Intel. But without further ado, let me just go through some quick housekeeping, and then I'll pass it off to our amazing speakers. So this is a Zoom webinar. It is being recorded. If you have questions, please put them in the Q&A. We'll definitely see them there. You can put them in the chat as well. We'll do our best to answer every question that comes in. We've got plenty of time today. But most importantly, have fun, ask your questions, right? We've got two of the best experts. If you've been with us before and on other webinars, you recognize Amy, you recognize Todd. So this will be a great time to get your questions asked and answered. And then we'll want to hear from you. So we do have that post-event survey that goes out at the end of every single webinar. One or four lucky survey participants will be randomly selected to get an item from the Detox store. We're super happy with the store. Everyone's got to have their swag. So definitely give us your feedback. We really appreciate it. It helps shape the community and what content we will deliver to you in the future. And then just a quick reminder, we've got another webinar coming up before Dell Tech World. That'll be on May 16th. We're talking about preventing threats with Dell commercial PCs. So this will be a fun one. So make sure you register for that. That registration link should be going here in the chat any moment. So make sure you sign up for that. And then if you're going to be at Dell Tech World, we're doing our networking reception yet again. It's become the Detox staple. We have a lot of fun each year. So make sure you pre-register. That'll get you in the running to win an Alienware gaming chair, which is super fun and super comfortable. I'm currently sitting in a gaming chair, and it makes my work from home life a lot better with the lumbar support. So highly recommend it. And without further ado, I know everyone's tired of hearing me talk, and you're here for Amy and Todd. So we've got two great speakers. And Amy, I'm going to pass it off to you.
Thank you so much. So I'm Amy Price. I am the evangelist and lead product marketing person within CSG, focused on security and manageability for PCs. And let me share my screen with you all so you can see what I am talking about. So today we're going to talk about a topic that's very dear to my heart, at least, which is about endpoint security. And I'm joined today by Todd Kramer from Intel. And again, we're going to really take you all from sort of a top to bottom type of approach. We're not going to go we're going to go deep into some areas, but we're also going to give you some sort of news and information that you can really understand moving forward. Just making sure all good. Everybody can see my screen. Okay, good. All right, so with this, one thing I want you to sort of keep in mind as we go through here is the distinctiveness of Dell and Intel and CrowdStrike coming together is we're offering something that hasn't been done so much in the security market before. We're calling it hardware-assisted security. So what is that? Well, Dell commercial client PCs, which you may or may not know, have telemetry that it gathers from its safe BIOS, doing off-host BIOS verification, from Intel firmware ME verification. These types of telemetry pieces are used to help detect threats, to help know when something is actually happening. So think of it like a castle and a moat where everyone likes to put up great big walls to protect the enterprise. But what happens when your attacker gets inside? What we have is like video cameras that are watching as these attackers are moving around the inside, reporting back so we can send the security guards out to take these attackers and get them out of the infrastructure. This is what Dell is bringing by using hardware-assisted security. Yes, we harden. Yes, we defend. Yes, we protect, but we do so much more than just that. So with this, I'll launch into it. So looking at sort of an overall perspective of this about hardware and firmware security, that what it really takes is this collective, okay? We like to say that security takes a village. It's not just, a single silver thing, and it's not just a single thing you do. Security is about defense in layers, and it's about protection in layers. So you start with the industry's most secure commercial PC, which is Dell, which is based on having a super secure supply chain, having hardware-based and hardware-assisted security, and having comprehensive support for that security, and then adding software on top of this through an expertly selected partner ecosystem. Well, why do we do this? Well, it's because the reality we live in It's a little weird out there is what I can say. With everybody coming in, different levels of attacks, you have attacks from people who are just common thieves going out and doing identity theft and trying to social engineer their way into something or using ransomware to extract the money from organizations. You have that. Plus, you have nation state level attacks, which tend to be highly sophisticated and they're using different techniques such as 0 days to be able to go in and after people. Well, this is sadly the reality today. Now, what a lot of people also don't realize about this is that um, cybersecurity breaches, you know what? Nobody has the perfect defense. It's not a matter of if, it's simply when. And that if somebody really wants in your system, you know what? They're going to find a way in. So, why do we come back to endpoints requiring these multiple layers of security and defense? Well, it's because this is an expanding attack surface. And I will dare say within your organizations that the single number one goal, number one place where attacks come in are in the endpoints. And this is not a Dell chart. This is from the MITRE attack framework. You may have heard of the MITRE Corporation. They do a lot of consulting work for the US government. They help a lot on the developments of standards. Well, they developed a really fabulous framework for understanding how cybersecurity threats come into a system and make their way across a network to do things. But the number one place for entry is the endpoint. So I'm going to focus in on a few of these specifically. Unsafe hardware, supply chain compromise, and social engineering. Now, these are statistics that come from recent reports. 69% of organizations report some kind of hardware or firmware level attack. Now, this is something that's coming in either directly from into the endpoint or something that's actually happening in a very nefarious way is being inserted. So, unsafe hardware. And a second big place for a vector for attack is through supply chain compromise. So 62% of network breaches in 2021 were attributed to supply chain vulnerabilities. Now, what is that? That could be anything from somebody getting a hold of a device before it's delivered and inserting something into BIOS or elsewhere to a line of code that somebody puts in and rests in there. And for supply chain compromise, you have to rely on a device that was designed and built in a safe and secure environment. The third part about social engineering of breaches driven by phishing attack, individual error, some of that, we have software that overcomes that, things that help to sort of really prevent that. But our focus today is really going to be on the hardware. So at Dell, we talk about our security in three levels: built with, built in, and built on. Built with, supply chain security. This is having hardware that shows up at your dock that we know is secure and safe from threats. And we offer additional services and additional capabilities, such as secured component verification, which takes a thumbprint, a digital thumbprint of a device at the factory, looking at the 8 primary components inside of a PC, develops a secure certificate for that. The device is shipped through different carriers all over the world, lands on your dock, and then that device, when it's first turned on, is checked against that certificate. And if there's a one-to-one match, that device has not been tampered with. So built with. Built in, which is going to be a focus for us in Intel today, which is around protecting and detecting these foundational level attacks that are coming in below the operating system. And they are going deep into it because why are people going into the operating system and then below the operating system? Why aren't they just sending it through as viruses? It's because there's good protection above the OS in many respects. They're looking for softer targets. This is why we're encouraging people to really take this hardware protection seriously. The third piece of this is built on. And this comes from the perspective of, even Dell looking at this and saying we need a network of trusted providers who can work together that we vet and we understand very well to bring forward and provide that additional, a really great level of protection, as well as that ability to detect. And this is really where CrowdStrike comes into the equation, where it brings really world class EDR and XDR across your network, and then allows your organizations to not only sort of protect everything, it also allows you to see what's going on at a particular time and alerting you when there's a problem. So that's the built on. Remember, built with, built in, built on. And I'll start a little bit. I could talk for hours about supply chain security, but I want to give you a perspective of where Dell places this. A number of years ago, we actually did what amounted to a dissertation. It's a fairly intensive paper, which you can see a link to at the bottom. If you search on Dell supply chain security paper, you'll find it. And what it does is it documents our process from the perspective of how we manage our ODMs. How do we ensure, for instance, that a product is developed securely? So that's like the first step. And we do that through a secure development lifecycle that all of our engineers are trained in. We do that through having security stops and interactions and checks throughout the design of a product. We do that by managing our software partners very closely and managing that information exchange. We make our partners, our software, our hardware, our production partners, write down their processes. And I mean, that level of formality is something that not everyone would do, but we're super, keen on doing that. So security, integrity through supplier accountability and due diligence. And by the way, we do a lot of audits we do a fair number of audits beyond what any other OEM in the market does based on some other market stats that we've seen. The PPID or piece part identification. Remember I mentioned SCV and those 8 components? PPID that's on all these components. You may be able to turn over a Dell device and see that PPID on there. That actually goes back, it will account the date of it and who provided it. So we've got an audit trail through the PPID as to where that component came from. And then, of course, we're doing these things to be in compliance with some of the best security codes that are coming out, such as the US Executive Order and Safe Code as well, which we've been involved with forever. Quality as well comes in through counterfeit prevention and detection. Remember, I mentioned this piece about always check and verify and consistently auditing. This is one way we do it. We do this. We stay on top of people. We also ensure resilience, both from a supplier perspective by having multiple sources of supply, and we audit and control each one of them individually. Another thing about Dell, enterprise code signing. Okay, do you know where your code is tonight? That sort of a thing. Do you know where your code was signed? Our code is signed in the United States for commercial devices, and it's signed in Austin, Texas, generally. So that brings in that level of additional scrutiny and security because we keep it within the confines of what we know to be a secure infrastructure. We also can offer things like additional freight tracking and other things. We have a second touch facility based in Nashville, Tennessee, for organizations that want to actually have an additional level of verification on their devices. And then finally, resilience through the silicon roots of trust, and firmware guidelines that we have, bias protection, and I mentioned earlier supplier redundancy. I'll stop here for a second. I'll move on to the next slide, but this is something, again, really take this seriously as you look at your suppliers. So ask them what their supply chain security is. And I mentioned about sort of the built with security. Again, we are offering secured component verification and seals, the built in capabilities. You're going to hear things mentioned around Dell Safe BIOS today, which is BIOS verification against a secure off host source. We know other OEMs will actually verify BIOS against a copy of it that's kept on their device. We looked at that and we said, whoever breaks in a device can probably get to that too, frankly. You know, if they're clever enough to get into the device without detection, they can probably get there too. This is why we verify BIOS on every boot against an off-host secure source that Dell maintains. And we do this as well for other highly privileged software and firmware, such as the Intel ME engine, which is used in Intel vPro. And we have other capabilities built in, such as being able to watch kill chains, indicators of attack. So we have a chassis intrusion switch. Say someone opens the back of the chassis. Well, you know what? At that point, we already know something's going on. We're watching that. We watch what they're doing, their steps going through it, and we can alert when an attack is understood. Another thing we offer is if a BIOS is found to be corrupt, we take a copy of it and we store it in a secure area. And that may not mean much to someone who's an ITDM, but it may mean a lot to somebody who's in the security business because the signatures of these kinds of attacks are often embedded in that kind of a code. Safe ID is something that Dell's worked and invested in for many years. And what that does is essentially moves the keys to the kingdom. So the encryption keys that open the route to the BIOS, essentially, these are kept in a dedicated chip, a TPM chip, which is built along industry standards. And then for smart card devices with smart cards and with fingerprints, we add an additional chip to secure the credentials, particularly for the fingerprints. And again, this is about hardware protecting, hardware assisting from our security all the way through. And then a little bit of a view towards the overall security framework for Dell from a prevent, detect, respond. And for those of you who have been in the security game, you'll recognize that these are pieces of the NIST approach, the way NIST looks at it. Prevent, detect, respond. There's actually a total of 6. And I can refer you to a paper that we've written on this subject. So there's a number of things that we do that are industry standard and that we work closely with Intel for, such as Boot Guard and BIOS Guard, and from Intel, public keys for the BIOS, which is part of the TPM methodology, and then authenticated updates. But we also add on top of that management of BIOS passwords, which we can do through Intune now. A fused root of trust, having a unique Dell UEFI secure boot, and secured component verification I mentioned earlier, as well as the second touch facilities and safe supply chain capabilities. These are about strong defense. Everybody needs a big prevention. First one, we all need big walls. But when you get into the other pieces, you're getting into things that are unique to Dell. So there are things, again, that are standard runtime boot resilience, downgrade protections, and such within the detect. But we add to that our TPM, the ability recently to detect CVEs. So wouldn't it be nice if you had a tool that can go out and tell you which BIOS in your Dell fleets are maybe need update? That's what we did. So CVE is a new capability we introduced recently that now will assess all of the Dell devices in your fleet and come back and report back on the ones that need to be updated. Kind of clever, and also helps. Remember, an up-to-date PC, up-to-date BIOS is going to be a much more secure BIOS. Office bias verification I talked about, and I talked about these other pieces. So let me skip forward to respond, which is around the image capture. And oh, by the way, we're capturing logs all through this process, constantly generating data. Say you're using Splunk, your security people are using Splunk to do analysis. This allows you to really take that, and now we can do an integration with our application called Dell Trusted Device, DTD, and you can take that information and move forward. Now, I may have laid a lot of information on you, let it soak into you, but there's some papers and some things you can read on this, which will allow you to sort of take a second stab at this, and perfectly happy to address questions at the end of the webinar as well. So with this, I'm going to turn it over to Todd and let him continue on.
Well, great. Thanks, Amy. And for I run on our commercial enabling side, so I work with the security ecosystem software vendors to take advantage of hardware security. And so that's what it's great to be here to talk about the things we've done with CrowdStrike and also just frame up what we do with Dell in building that security. So here, I think, Amy, let's build out the full attack chain. And what I'll talk about here is the attack surface. You'll hear attack surfaces in security talked about in an external fashion, but what we've done really here is taking a view to talk about defense in depth. That's a security term. And so what that means is you really need to protect all the layers of the PC. When I talk about hardware security, many times people think, well, yeah, sure, you've got security that protects the chipset and hardware itself. That's true. But it's more than that. You know, when we talk about the silicon security that's in a vPro device, Hardware Shield, we work years in advance with Dell to talk about those features. And then Dell thinks about how that fits in their portfolio to do BIOS protections, how to do off-host firmware verification, and how to enhance that into a usable form. So that helps, hardware security in the silicon get extended in a real solution in Dell for that below the OS built-in security that Amy talked about. But as you can see here, there's attack surfaces that go above that, right? And so Intel works with the OSV vendors, Microsoft and Chrome and others, to take advantage in the OS, virtualization-based security, other things that are hardware dependent. And then furthermore, the things that we do with the antivirus or EDR vendors like CrowdStrike. And so that's really, when you're talking about this, there's a whole orchestration that happens to build this defense in depth. And you truly need that, right? With attackers through the years here, it's not just they're trying to go for the easy targets in the OS. The more that gets secure above the OS, the more they're trying to find ways in underneath. And those attacks that happen, like a rootkit firmware attack, those are fundamentally devastating. May be rare, but you need a defense in depth. And so you need to look at security, not just in the security software you buy, but understand how it's building this defense in depth and how it comes together. And Intel and Dell understand that, right? It's not about swivel chair and multiple tools. You are buying CrowdStrike for that system of record that it is, right? I think that's up to 22 modules that cover everything. And more people want that platform approach. And so a lot of the integrations that we'll talk about here are in fact integrated into that console of CrowdStrike to do your daily SecOps duties. So that's what's unique in what Amy talked about earlier about building multi-layer security and this being a first. It really is coming together in a single system of record. And you can be confident that, that we are working lockstep with CrowdStrike to build that and make it the industry best. So just in general here, we talked about the supply chain of security. When the device is built, you need that attestation coming off the line to ensure that the PC part and components that you bought and got shipped didn't get intercepted in transit. And then more so to test it out in the field, right? There's reasons to reattest that, and those supply chain security solutions from Intel and Dell help you do that. The rootkit firmware attack gets right into the wheelhouse of Dell Trusted Device and the Dell components. And then you think through, okay, the device is booting up. How do I ensure that, the golden state, the images, the firmware, everything checked out so that when I load the OS, it's not loading on a bad foundation. That attestation reporting that happens between the below the OS and the OS itself every time you boot, very important, right? You can't have the OS running on something that's compromised. And then, moving into the user. Now the user's getting into their machine to go log in various places. So multi-factor authentication, we all use that daily. Well, guess what? Multi-factor authentication is getting broken in some regard. So you need to understand how to hardware secure that credential so that it's backed with multiple factors, including the device itself. And so there is hardware between Intel and Dell and the OS that helps secure that credential login to the best it can with hardware assisted security. I'll talk about app and memory attacks, which are actually the most frequent attacks used, and we'll talk about that on the next slide. Ransomware detection as well. So there's a number of these, and if you build this out here, to talk about fileless attacks, CrowdStrike talks quite a bit about this. I think 75% of all attacks, whether it's ransomware, you name it, is coming into memory as a fileless attack. The old days of malware coming in, dropping something on disk, easily scannable by a signature are gone. And so what happens is that user commonly clicks on a phishing attack, and that's the entry point. But what it's doing behind the scenes is it's dropping a Cobalt Strike attack or something into memory, and that starts the chain of attack, right? Where they're going to try to do more. And so it's even difficult for these antivirus vendors like CrowdStrike to be able to scan that memory. Memory scanning is a very compute intensive process. They wish they could scan more frequent, more deeply, because that's where 75% of the attacks are coming in. So it's a very difficult attack. It's a favorite. And I think we can go to the next slide, Amy, to talk a little bit more about that. And so this just kind of matched what I said before, the life cycle, right? Things in the news, make sure that all important supply chain attacks are covered. You make sure that the devastating BIOS attacks are covered. Make sure that you're using not only the anti-phishing solution, but the solution I'll talk about next in CrowdStrike to be able to catch those attacks. So really, there's lots of attacks, but narrowing your focus down to the big three will do quite a bit. And I'll talk about that attack surface. We tested that out. I have a slide where we'll talk about what the PC hardware has done over time to improve across this life cycle. So yeah, let's go to the next slide. And here's a slide that, Amy talked about the MITRE ATT&CK framework. Well, we won't get into all the, hundreds of tactics and techniques that make up MITRE ATT&CK, but here it just boiled up into a simple attack chain, right? The initial access, that phishing attack, then it leads to, after the user clicks on it, it executes into memory. It's trying to gain a foothold. Now it's trying to hide itself and persist. It's trying to move to the second host in the fleet. It's trying to evade the EDR's defenses. It's trying to move laterally. And this may take, they may lay in wait, 70 days, the dwell time, and they'll pick a time of their choosing to actually launch that ransomware attack or what have you. So this is the attack chain, and the red band is the security software, your system of record that, by the way, does a fantastic job. We look at the data, and a lot of these attacks, into the 90, 95, 98%, CrowdStrike is catching it with its great file-based static analysis, its behavioral analysis. But guess what? Things can slip through, or there are things in hardware that help shut down an attack from even happening. So here we mapped out, when we talk about all those hardware features, here's what sits behind that attack chain between Intel and Dell in the hardware we have mapped. And that's the other thing is Intel, we've just joined MITRE, and you're going to see us map exactly, so exactly the TTP where you have something in your PC that helps block an attack, that helps hardware assist an attack. A lot of this stuff has been invisible for years, and that's what we're on this webinar to tell you. When you think about security software, don't just think about your software and your EDR. Think about the chassis, because it makes that hardware security in CrowdStrike that much better. And there's a lot of this is out of the box, right? We've done these integrations, so they're not security projects for you. They just work. Land the right software, CrowdStrike, on the right Dell device, the right generation Intel vPro machine, and now you've done quite a bit to protect your attack surface. So yeah, let's look at the next slide. And this, we've done so a lot of work between us to do what we said, right? Get that multi-layer security. It isn't a project that you need to do to go integrate these three solutions. We've done a lot of that for you. So it's quite simply you picking the right generation, the right software, and you get a lot of this out of the box, extra hardware assisted security. And so we put together this graphic again to remind you of all the different layers that you're getting when these come together. Yeah, we could go into that a little bit deeper, where Amy and I can both talk about a little bit of those integrations. Before we get to that, I'll give a little background. So Intel, about I think it was a year and a half ago, we had been working with CrowdStrike in our threat detection technologies. And so two of the features that we have, and there's a bundle of features you get with threat detection technology, which is our hardware assisted piece, CrowdStrike implemented. So today you can go inside the CrowdStrike console, and there's two simple toggle switches. You just turn on HEAD, hardware enhanced exploit detection. And what that's going to do is bring up unique Intel CPU telemetry that CrowdStrike uses to identify ROP and JOP attacks to memory. So I remember that memory is a very important attack surface. So CrowdStrike uses that to help the telemetry to go after those attacks. The other one is accelerated memory scanning. As I talked about, it's compute intensive to use the CPU to do that. Well, what we do is we have inside every Intel SoC a GPU, and we have an API, and we've worked with CrowdStrike to, anytime they do memory scanning, they offload it to the GPU. It lets them do more scanning, more targeted scanning using that high performance GPU. What does that do for you? those 75% of attacks coming in, it gives CrowdStrike a better chance to be able to find 75% of those attacks that are spinning in, causing all that problem, right? And then here I pulled a diagram to show that endpoint security really delivering the goodness to the CrowdStrike AI in the cloud, right? So CrowdStrike's engineered that native cloud-born protection, more telemetry, better data. That's what you're getting, feeding the CrowdStrike machine and AI, detecting more. So it just gives you a little bit here of how that's working directly in CrowdStrike. And I encourage you, if you are running CrowdStrike, go in the console and turn those on. They're sort of a no-brainer. And one last point is Intel IT, we use CrowdStrike at Intel as our EDR. And there's a whole case study out there. You can go and look through how our IT department went and piloted out this technology and proved it out and the efficacy that they see on it. So it's real, it works, and there's a whole case study behind it. So here's the full build out of the solution. If you go through, Amy, maybe build it up here. We kind of boiled it up into a nice chart. And I'll talk, what I just talked about is from the chipset directly, CrowdStrike is integrated for those threat detection features. There's those two toggle switches right there, and that's helping in those class of attacks. The other part that I'll just sort of tee up for Amy is, we work ahead years in advance. Those hardware shield features that form Dell Trusted Device, those below the OS features are engineered into a real product in Dell. And then unique features like off-host firmware verification, also a vPro feature that Dell extended. So there's a lot of goodness that comes together, and now it's all being integrated into a single console system of record for a lot of these alerts and telemetry for your SecOps. So they don't need to swivel chair into multiple pieces. They can get a lot of the pieces right there in the console they want. And I'll see if Amy wants to add some more.
I do. What I want to also mention is we had a question. There's a question that came in about being able to sort of see BIOS hardware details on CrowdStrike and have updates from that manager. You have two pieces in the security game. You've got keeping the devices secure, and you've got managing the devices to be secure. And this first one is really about many of the things and the features we've talked here about keeping things secure. But SecOps and IT ops work very differently. So SecOps is going to be the one who's operating your CrowdStrike CrowdStrike. So if you have a separate security operation within your organization, they're the ones who are going to be running CrowdStrike. They're going to be seeing the alerts. They're going to be taking action. They're going to be trying to detect things very quickly. And this is one great way to do it, because you can see when something fails BIOS, and you can also see the TDT and incoming information from the Intel vPro. So all that's coming together for memory scanning and detecting some of these really bad attacks. So that's like the security side. But management of PCs is generally, majority of PCs in the world, in the enterprise commercial world, are managed with Microsoft tools, SCCM, and more often Intune. So what Dell is doing, many of the BIOS management facilities are all built within Intune, and we have integrations. If you want to update your BIOS and manage your BIOS, that's going to come in either from Dell Command to SCCM or Dell Command via Blob to, and there's a whole another presentation on that, but it's going to come in directly into your management tools. So that's where you're going to see your BIOS hardware, BIOS details. This is where you're going to be able to take action on updating BIOS. But remember that, what we're talking about here is a security approach, but you also have to remember managing your PCs is equally important. And maybe if they ask, if we get an opportunity, we can come back and talk more about how PCs are managed to be safe and secure. So I answered that one live. So that's my addition on this one, Todd.
Great. I was going to add one last piece here, and we even have a demo out there. vPro also has integrations and use through Dell Command Suite. So if you have a fleet vPro enabled, when you want to use that chipset remediation where you do a remote KVM, wake up the PC machine at night to apply a firmware rebuild or patch, remote secure erase, those type of things are all there as those manageability usages that really are security remediation. So again, there's lots of power here to take advantage of for not only preventative threat detection, but as Amy mentioned, for your IT team to build, have that ready in case of disaster to rebuild and get out in the field quickly to address threats and update the device.
Absolutely. We had another question that came in around Dell documentation for consumer level devices. And what I'd come back to it and said that, yeah, we don't, the same capabilities in terms of security are not offered on consumer level devices that they are in commercial. And that includes the vPro enterprise version that you're going to need to be able to bring this into effect. But the same thing, I'll tell you, in my personal life, I'm a live music rock and roll photographer. And my editing machine is a Dell Precision with vPro. And guess why? Because security matters to me. And that's, I guess, the thing you sort of take into consideration. I know cost comes into the factor, but it's not really, in my opinion, that additional cost is going to get you so much more from a security perspective. So if you're running consumer grade devices in your fleet, I understand completely your reasons for doing it, but consider upgrading to commercial grade and taking on things like vPro because it's going to add an additional layer of protection. And by the way, the other things, Dell Trusted Device, these things are also offered only on commercial grade devices. So, shall we move on, or any other questions? Todd, anything else to add?
No, I think we're
Okay.
good.
All righty. Let's move on to the next slide, which I believe is one of yours. The proof's in the
Yeah,
pudding.
yeah, proof's in the pudding. I think that was your tagline, Amy. We were discussing that earlier, but it sort of works here, right? I mean, a lot of people always say, well, yeah, I'm glad you got that security in there and I'm assuming it works. Well, you need to prove that out, right? And so we have put a lot of effort in Intel and Dell together, really, around defining that, right? And so there are security expert research firms like IOActive. And so here, when we turn over, we did a 13th generation study, and we have them look at in detail between a 4-year-old Intel vPro device and a modern generation, right? And to just really for ourselves to see, well, what type of attack surfaces did we close? Because we're constantly releasing new features. And they calculated a 70% attack surface reduction on a new Intel vPro machine versus a 4-year-old generation. And it's a detailed study. I recommend you look at it. It's on our website, but that just gives you the idea that things are moving here, right? I mean, sure, we want you to refresh, but there's real reasons from a security perspective to do that, to get, because the attackers aren't, staying static, right? They're constantly evolving. So you do need to think about your hardware in addition to your security software to really get that best defense in depth to get all the attack surfaces plugged.
And I think you've got something kind of exciting to talk to us about next, Todd.
Well,
A
sure.
little
I
bit of
mean, you can't
taste.
do anything without the AI connection. And be rest assured, Intel and Dell are off working on the next solutions, right? There's a lot going on in what I'll call AI for security. There's also a lot going on in security for AI, right? We're involved in all those areas, but it starts, AI doesn't happen until the chassis, the processing power is there to run AI, right? And so you've had machine learning for years, and machine learning that even potentially runs on a client device. Most of the heavy lifting deep learning AI all had to be run on the heavy iron, the Xeons in the cloud, to like CrowdStrike has engineered, right? But now we're in a game-changing new era here. And so when you think about AI, the new Intel Core Ultra that was launched has AI optimizations across all of it. We call it our XPU strategy. So there are new optimizations because some ISVs are going to run and need fast AI inference that uses the CPU. They're going to need like we have our threat detection that looks for ransomware. It uses the GPU. That type of AI runs best on the GPU. And then you have these brand new usages to say, if you could run deep learning, which is a specific type of AI that does very unique things on its own. And that's what the industry is very excited about. Now, for the first time, you can run deep learning workloads to offload to the MPU, sustained in the background, doing that extra security, not disrupting the user's experience, but doing new things. And so now all future Intel PCs, mobile, desktop, all have this. And so that's exciting. And so with the next slide, let's look at some work we're driving. We already have security ISVs releasing deep learning solutions on Intel Core Ultra, but I'm just, as a CrowdStrike webinar, I'll talk a little bit about that work, right? We're actively working with CrowdStrike, looking at the use cases here. And we have a wonderful set of blogs from Intel and Dell on that. I encourage you to read the two-part blog, highly technical for your SecOps teams to read. You could scan that QR code and read both of those blogs. And we also have a higher level video that gives you an introduction from CrowdStrike on this work that we're doing. But they're looking at a number of usages that we hope this year we'll see some releases. That's up to CrowdStrike, but we are working very fast and very well as a triad for this. And some of those usages are proving out, right? Showing that the MPU is doing what it's supposed to do, not utilizing the CPU, bolstering the performance. And what could you do with that deep learning there? And so that blog talks about, things where that deep learning can actually make the cloud more efficient. It can zone in and understand, if you think about it, all of that wonderful data for threat detection, you can't send every bit of data from an endpoint to a cloud. Impossible, right? So that's where deep learning can come in to help find hotspots, help focus what needs to be sent to cloud, because cloud's going to still do its job on AI. And then still furthermore, there's going to be AI that helps, instead of looking for ransomware or new variants, classifying it on the fly without a human there to create that deep learning rule. These are the type of possibilities. So there's wonderful innovation going to happen in AI on the endpoint, and look for more from Intel and Dell in this regard. And so we're pretty excited about what's coming down the pike here.
So I can bring us home here. So a lot of what we talked about is about getting the most from your security investments. So you buy Dell commercial PCs and you have CrowdStrike and you've got vPro operational in your system, you can turn this all on to give you amazing level of threat detection, reducing your attack surface by 70% through this enhanced threat detection. Remember, a lot of the game today with threat detection is to not let threats linger in the system. So we have seen now where threats, 5, 6 years ago, used to be inside of networks for months and months and months. And we've seen that drop to months, to weeks, to days, to hours, and in some cases to minutes. So the faster, the best, the better. And also establishing readiness for zero trust. So for instance, zero trust will assume that essentially trust nothing, verify everything. But we also believe that having secure hardware, start with something secure and not full of potentially threats or vulnerabilities, that helps you establish that zero trust readiness. It's a great foundation for you going forward, especially considering how many PCs out there are going to be issues for you. And then the third thing with our built in, built with, built in, built on philosophy, we're really looking at trying to help organizations consolidate their security platforms. What we see a lot of times when we talk to customer is a huge array of different security tools in use. And what you can do is to begin to reduce those by strategically selecting them where they all kind of fit together, work together, and each one is bringing specific capabilities that you can use in concert with the others. So again, being able to reduce and get that down. And then, as I mentioned, light her up. That's what they tell me. Light this thing up. Activate that protection in seconds by activating what we are providing to you with Dell Trusted Device, with Intel vPro, and with CrowdStrike. So how do you do that? Well, start by buying Dell commercial PCs and ensure it's running on that Intel vPro platform, you actually have that up and operational, and add CrowdStrike to the purchase, and then you're pretty much there. So there's a few things in here to read the solution brief. These will, again, this will give you all the information we've talked about today. Another call to action for you is to get in touch with your global, with your security, with your Dell seller, or contact us through global.security.sales@dell.com. And there's a little QR code for you to be able to read the solution brief. And that is a lot of what we have for you today. Remember, we talked about really hardware-assisted security. We're talking about all the goodness that Intel vPro is bringing along with Dell and CrowdStrike to this. And we also gave you a taste of some things to come with AI. So with that, I think we'll just sort of open it up for any other last comments. Todd, you have anything else you want to add?
No, it's great. Like I said, for us in the space there, just sort of taking the wraps off of what you have there is just great to have the dialogue and the discussion. So great to be here.
Definitely.
Awesome. Thank you both. I mean, I'm not seeing any other questions. Amy, do you got any other comments you want to make at the end here?
Not at this particular time. I think there's a lot of concern about the fact that we're not offering some of these security processes, security capabilities down at the consumer level. I know that many organizations will buy consumer PCs to save money. I again totally get that, completely understand that. But what we've done to consider commercial is we're looking again to a large extent, it's sort of the high end of the medium and large enterprise, which do focus on these commercial capabilities. The other thing is that if you have a smaller organization, maybe you should consider doing this as a managed service. So Dell offers capabilities that will allow us to give you these super great commercial machines, as well as actually manage them and manage them to be secure and even operate security for you through our MDR services, which will bring CrowdStrike directly into your environment. And we feel like that is a great option for organizations that don't want to stand up their own security operations center, is to use Dell services to give you this and fill in the gaps. So that's a good question. So Todd, we had one come in. What's the hardest challenge in the future of AI that we would worry about? What would be your concern?
Well, obviously, security for AI is the foremost, right? And so that whole security is still getting, the attacks aren't coming, AI assisted attacks in the volumes, but they're starting, right? To target that AI to try to get it. And we're hard at work between us, the OSV vendors, others, to provide a range of solutions to ensure that's secure or gets better, right? And so that's an area of high focus. I'll just sort of comment.
Okay. And I think for me, I'm going to come at it from the data layer, is that I don't believe you can ever take the human out of AI. And the reason I believe this is because the challenge is to know whether your data is good or not. Are the answers you're getting real? Do they meet a sniff test? And certainly in the early days, and I think early implementations of AI, we're going to have to pay a lot of attention to what's coming out so that we're making decisions on good data and we're making decisions with good advice. So don't I think that the challenge is we can't just give it all to the machines. We have to stay involved. And I think the perception is that the machines are going to run us. I feel like that the humans need to stay in the middle of this. And I think that's going to be a challenge for a lot of people who think that AI should be a technology play. I still think it's fundamentally a human play. Any other questions that we can answer today? This was fun. Enjoyed doing this and enjoyed meeting y'all. Y'all ask good questions, by the way.
Hey, that's what we try and do here at DTalk. We try and make you think a little bit.
All right. Well, on behalf of Todd and myself, thank you very much for this time, and I'll let Jack bring it home.
Yeah, thank you, Todd. Thank you, Amy. Thank you, everyone, for being here. We really appreciate all your feedback, all your information, all your questions. Right, we're nothing without the community. We couldn't get these great speakers without you guys. So you guys showing up each and every time, asking these great thought-provoking questions means a lot to us. Yeah, thank you, Amy. But so we're just happy to have you here today. Please give us your feedback on the post-event survey. It'll pop up right when you leave the webinar, and pay attention to your email. We will get this posted on dtuck.com by the end of the week. So if you want to come back to it, if you got more questions, feel free to reach out. We're here for you. So stay tuned, and don't forget, we do have the next webinar coming up on May 16th. And with that, Todd, Amy, everybody, thank you all. We really appreciate you.